One man walked into a fortress of death and emerged holding the throat of the enemy. This is not legend. This is not folklore. This is the true story of a single soldier who broke 6 fortified bunkers with nothing but a submachine gun, a handful of grenades, and a will that made trained killers surrender in fear. Before we begin, please hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you are watching from, your city, state, or country. Stay with us until the very end because what this man did will change how you think about courage forever. The morning of March 20th, 1945, arrived without mercy. Dawn came slowly over the German frontier, bleeding pale light across a landscape that had been hammered into ruin. Near the village of Nether Warsbach, the earth itself seemed dead. Shell craters overlapped like wounds that would never heal. Shattered tree trunks stood like blackened teeth. The ground was frozen mud and ice, churned by tanks and boots and the relentless machinery of war. Winter had not released its grip, and the air carried the smell of cordite, wet soil, and something worse, something organic and permanent that no soldier ever forgot. The Siegfried Line stretched across this desolation like a cancer of concrete and steel. The Germans called it the West Wall. To the Americans of the 45th Infantry Division, it was simply hell made solid. Pillboxes squatted in the earth, their gun slits narrow and black, their walls thick enough to shrug off artillery. Minefields sprawled between them. Barbed wire coiled in rusted tangles. Trenches connected bunker to bunker, allowing defenders to shift position without exposing themselves to fire. This was not a line. This was a fortress system designed by engineers who understood killing, built by laborers who had no choice, and manned by soldiers who knew that retreat meant execution. Fox Company had been fighting for days. They were exhausted in a way that went beyond the body. Men moved like automatons, their faces hollow, their eyes fixed on some middle distance that held nothing at all. Sleep came in snatches measured in minutes. Hot food was a memory. The cold penetrated everything, boots, coats, flesh, bone, until shivering became a permanent state and frostbite claimed toes and fingers with bureaucratic indifference. These were infantrymen, and they were being ground down by inches. The objective was a low ridge that rose perhaps 200 feet above the surrounding terrain. It did not look like much. Hills in Europe rarely did, but that ridge commanded the entire sector. Whoever held it controlled the roads, the fields, the approaches. The Germans understood this perfectly, and they had fortified it with the cold logic of men who intended to die there if necessary. 6 pillboxes formed an interlocking network of fire. Each bunker covered the approach to the others. Machine guns were sited to create crossfire zones where nothing could live. Mortars ranged the open ground with mathematical precision. Any assault would be detected immediately, engaged from multiple positions, and destroyed before it reached the first bunker. Fox Company knew this because they had already tried. The previous day, a platoon had pushed forward in a textbook advance, moving by squads, using cover where they could find it, suppressing the bunkers with rifle fire while others maneuvered. It had not mattered. The German gunners waited until the Americans were fully committed, exposed on the slope with nowhere to go, and then they opened fire with everything. Machine guns hammered the frozen ground into geysers of dirt and ice. Mortars walked across the hillside with terrible accuracy. Men fell, some silently, some screaming. The survivors crawled back, dragging the wounded, leaving the dead because there was no choice. 8 men did not return. 8 soldiers who had crossed an ocean, survived North Africa, clawed through Sicily, bled in Italy, and endured France, were now scattered across a German hillside because a ridge needed to be taken and someone had to try. Sergeant Jack Treadwell had watched it happen. He was not part of that assault, but he saw the whole thing from a position lower on the slope. He saw the men go forward. He saw the bunkers come alive. He saw bodies jerk and fall and lie still. He heard the screaming, thin and desperate against the continuous roar of gunfire. He watched men try to run and get cut down mid-stride. He saw a soldier stand up, arms spread wide, as if asking why, before machine gun fire tore him apart. And he saw the survivors stumble back into cover, their faces blank with shock, their hands shaking, their voices gone. Treadwell was 32 years old, which made him ancient by infantry standards. Most of the men around him were 19, 20, boys who had been clerks and farmhands and students before the war reached into their lives and pulled them into uniform. Treadwell had joined before Pearl Harbor. He believed in duty with a clarity that did not require explanation. He was not tall, not physically imposing, but he carried himself with a quiet authority that men recognized instinctively. He did not speak unless he had something to say. He did not waste movement. He had survived this long because he was competent, careful, and absolutely without hesitation when hesitation would kill him. Now he lay in a shallow trench with the rest of Fox Company, staring up at the ridge. The pillboxes were barely visible, low humps of reinforced concrete with camouflage netting and dirt piled over them. The gun slits were dark horizontal lines, invisible until they erupted with fire. Treadwell could hear the Germans moving inside, boots on concrete, the clang of ammunition crates, voices speaking a language he did not understand but recognized as calm and professional. They were not afraid. They were dug in, supplied and coordinated. They had fields of fire that covered every approach. They could hold this position indefinitely. The company commander was a young lieutenant whose name Treadwell barely remembered because lieutenants died quickly and new ones arrived constantly. This one was 23, maybe, with a map case and a radio operator and eyes that had not yet learned to hide fear. He stared at the ridge like it was a mathematics problem he could not solve. Artillery had been called in, but it had done nothing. The bunkers were built to withstand bombardment. Direct hits left craters nearby, but the pillboxes themselves stood intact, their walls absorbing blasts that would have leveled houses. Mortars could not reach the gun slits. Rifle fire was pointless against concrete. Tanks could not climb the slope without exposing their thinner side armor to German anti-tank guns positioned in the tree line beyond. The lieutenant had no good options. He had orders to take the ridge. He had already lost 8 men trying. Now he sat in the frozen mud and tried to think of a way forward that would not kill everyone. Treadwell did not wait for orders. He understood what needed to happen. The pillboxes had to be taken individually, at close range, by someone willing to cross open ground under fire and get close enough to kill the crews inside. This was not theory. This was simply fact. No amount of supporting fire would change the geometry of the situation. Someone had to go forward. Someone had to reach the first bunker. Someone had to neutralize it, then move to the second, then the third, until the interlocking fields of fire collapsed and the defense broke. It required speed, violence, and a willingness to accept that survival was not guaranteed. He checked his Thompson submachine gun, a weapon he preferred for close work. 45 caliber, simple and brutal, it fired fast enough to saw through wood and punch through sandbags. He had 6 magazines, 30 rounds each, taped together in pairs for faster reloads. He carried 8 grenades, Mark II fragmentation models, pineapples the men called them, each one a small iron sphere packed with explosive and notched wire designed to fragment into shrapnel. The grenades were cold to the touch, the metal leaching heat from his hands. He secured them carefully, making sure the pins were tight, making sure they would not snag on anything when he moved. Around him, men watched. They knew what he was doing. The Thompson, the grenades, the way he moved with absolute focus, stripping away everything unnecessary. No one spoke. What could they say? Some looked away. Others stared with expressions that mixed hope and horror. They wanted him to succeed because if he did not, they would have to try next, and they knew how that would end. Treadwell did not announce his intention. He simply rose from the trench and began walking toward the ridge. Not running, walking. He moved at a steady, measured pace, his boots crunching on frozen ground, his breath misting in the cold air. The slope ahead was perhaps 300 yards to the first bunker, open ground with no cover except shallow depressions and scattered rocks. The pillboxes watched him. He could feel their attention. Imagine the German gunners leaning forward, peering through their gun sights, watching this lone American walk toward them as if he owned the earth. The first burst of machine gun fire came when he was 50 yards from the trench. The sound was a roar, a mechanical shriek that obliterated all other noise. Tracers snapped past him, bright lines of light that moved faster than thought. Dirt exploded around his boots. He did not dive for cover. He angled his approach, moving at an oblique to the bunker, forcing the gunner to traverse the weapon, buying himself seconds. The MG-42 fired 1,200 rounds per minute, a rate so fast the individual shots blurred into a continuous scream. The Germans called it Hitler's buzzsaw. The sound alone could break men, that relentless tearing noise that promised death with industrial efficiency. Treadwell kept walking. His mind was utterly clear. He watched the bunker, calculated angles, noted the position of the gun slit. The machine gun paused, the barrel overheating or the belt needing to be changed. In that silence he ran, not toward the bunker but to the left, away from the direct line of fire, using a slight fold in the ground that provided a few inches of defilade. The gun opened up again, chewing the earth where he had been, adjusting, searching. He dropped into a crater, rolled to the edge, came up firing. The Thompson bucked against his shoulder, hammering out short, controlled bursts. He aimed at the gun slit, not expecting to hit anything but forcing the gunner to flinch, to pull back, to hesitate. 30 rounds gone in seconds. He dropped the empty magazine, slammed in a fresh one, kept moving. The second bunker opened fire, its machine gun raking the ground from a different angle. Now he was caught between two positions, crossfire that should have killed him instantly. He sprinted forward, low and fast, closing the distance to the first bunker, getting inside the arc where the gun could not depress low enough to hit him. 30 yards, 20. The machine gun fell silent, the crew unable to track him at this range. He pulled a grenade, yanked the pin, counted 2 seconds, and hurled it at the gun slit. The throw was perfect, years of practice compressed into one smooth motion. The grenade disappeared into the dark opening. He turned away, dropped flat, covered his head. The explosion was muffled by concrete but powerful enough to shake the ground. Smoke and dust billowed from the slit. He was up immediately, running to the bunker entrance, a low steel door set into the rear. He kicked it open, threw another grenade inside, slammed the door shut, and pressed himself against the exterior wall. The blast rattled his teeth. He counted 3 seconds, pulled the door open, and went in with the Thompson ready. The interior was chaos. Smoke, dust, the smell of explosive and blood. 4 German soldiers, 2 dead, 2 wounded and dazed. He shouted at them in English, the only language he had, pointing the Thompson at their faces. They raised their hands, their eyes wide with shock and pain. He gestured toward the entrance. They crawled out, moving slowly, one man bleeding from the ears, the other cradling a shattered arm. Treadwell did not shoot them. They were neutralized, no longer a threat. He shoved them toward the American lines and turned his attention to the second bunker. Fox Company watched in disbelief. From the trench, they saw Treadwell emerge from the first pillbox, saw the German soldiers stumbling down the slope, saw him reload the Thompson and start moving toward the next bunker as if this were routine. The company commander grabbed his radio, started calling for covering fire, but the men were already shooting, pouring rifle fire at the remaining pillboxes. not to destroy them but to keep the crews distracted, to give Treadwell a chance. The second bunker was 60 yards away, positioned to cover the approach to the first. The crew inside had watched Treadwell take the first position, and now they were ready. They opened fire the moment he moved, sustained bursts that tore the ground apart. He ran in a crouch, zigzagging, using every scrap of cover. A mortar round landed 15 feet to his right, the blast lifting him off his feet and slamming him into the frozen earth. His ears rang. His vision blurred. He tasted blood. For a moment he could not move, could not breathe, his body trying to remember how to function. Then training took over, animal instinct older than thought. He rolled to his knees, grabbed the Thompson, checked the magazine. Still functional. He stood, swayed, forced himself forward. The machine gun found him again, bullets snapping past so close he felt the pressure wave. One round clipped his jacket, tearing fabric but missing flesh. He threw himself behind a jagged chunk of concrete, a piece of some earlier fortification blown apart by artillery. The machine gun hammered the concrete, chipping it, searching for an angle. He pulled another grenade, armed it, waited for a pause in the fire. When it came, he stood and threw in one motion, not at the gun's slit but at the base of the bunker where the walls met the ground. The grenade bounced, rolled against the concrete, detonated. The blast was not enough to breach the wall, but it cracked the camouflage netting and sent debris into the air. More importantly, it forced the crew to react, to wonder if he was trying to collapse the structure, to shift their focus for critical seconds. Treadwell sprinted the remaining distance, reached the blind spot beneath the gun slit, pulled 2 grenades, armed them both, and dropped them through a narrow ventilation shaft he had spotted near the base. He ran 5 steps and hit the ground. The double explosion lifted the roof of the bunker, concrete fracturing with a sharp crack. Smoke poured from every opening. He approached the entrance, weapon ready, but there was no resistance. The crew was dead or incapacitated. He did not go inside. There was no need. He turned toward the third bunker. Time became strange. He had been moving for minutes, but it felt like hours. His lungs burned from exertion and cold air. His hands were numb despite the gloves. Sweat soaked his uniform beneath the layers, then froze against his skin. The Thompson was hot, the barrel radiating heat that he could feel through his gloves. He had 4 magazines left, 5 grenades, 3 more bunkers. The mathematics were simple and brutal. The third pillbox sat higher on the slope, positioned to dominate the entire killing field. This crew had been watching everything. They knew what was coming. When Treadwell moved, they were ready. The machine gun opened up immediately, joined by a second gun from the 4th bunker. Bullets filled the air like rain, a storm of metal that defied survival. He went to ground, crawling behind a low ridge of frozen earth, pressing himself flat. Rounds snapped overhead, so close they cracked like whips. He could not advance. He could not retreat. He was pinned, and pinned men died slowly when the mortars found them. But the mortars did not come. He realized the German crews were hesitating, afraid to drop shells so close to their own positions now that he was between bunkers. The machine guns kept firing, but they could not depress low enough to hit him at this angle. He was in dead ground, a tiny fold in the terrain that provided cover. He used it. He crawled forward inches at a time, dragging himself through mud and ice, the Thompson cradled in his arms. 20 yards, 30. The machine gun traversed, searching, but he stayed low, moving when the gun swung away, freezing when it came back. He reached a shell crater and rolled into it, gasping. His body was shaking, adrenaline and exhaustion warring for control. He looked back toward Fox Company and saw men standing in the trench, watching, their mouths open. They were not supposed to be standing. Standing got you killed, but they could not look away. They were witnessing something that defied their understanding of what was possible. The third bunker was close now, perhaps 40 feet. He could hear voices inside, German soldiers shouting, coordinating. He pulled a grenade, armed it, and threw it as hard as he could, not at the gun slit but at the entrance. The grenade hit the steel door and bounced back, landing in the open. He cursed, flattened himself in the crater. The explosion sent shrapnel screaming overhead. A stupid mistake, throwing too hard, but he was alive. He tried again, this time lobbing the grenade in a gentle arc. It landed at the base of the door and detonated, warping the metal, jamming it shut. The gun slit went dark. The crew was trapped inside, unable to exit, their field of fire limited. Treadwell stood, fired a long burst through the slit, emptied the magazine, reloaded, fired again. He could not see what he was hitting, but he heard screaming. He moved to the ventilation shaft, dropped his last 2 grenades inside, and ran. The explosion was massive, lifting a section of the roof and collapsing part of the interior wall. The bunker fell silent. 3 down, 3 to go, but Treadwell was running on fumes. His legs felt like lead. His vision swam at the edges. He had been under fire for 20 minutes, moving at full intensity, burning energy he did not have. He dropped to one knee, forced himself to breathe slowly to calm his heart rate. The Thompson felt impossibly heavy. He had 2 magazines left, 3 grenades. The remaining bunkers were the highest on the ridge, the most fortified, the command position. Fox Company was moving now. He could see them advancing up the slope, using the ground he had cleared, heading toward the neutralized bunkers. The company commander was shouting orders, organizing squads, getting men into position. The sight gave Treadwell something he had not expected. Not relief, but purpose. He had broken the line. Now he had to finish it. The 4th bunker opened fire on Fox Company, forcing them to ground. Treadwell rose and moved toward it, not because he wanted to, but because it was necessary. The crew spotted him, swung the machine gun in his direction. He did not have the energy to run. He walked, firing the Thompson from the hip, long, ragged bursts that emptied the magazine in seconds. The recoil jarred his arms. Brass casings tumbled through the air. The gun slit went dark for a moment, the crew flinching back. He closed the distance, pulled a grenade, threw it through the opening. The explosion silenced the position. 2 bunkers left. The 5th and 6th pillboxes sat side by side, mutually supporting, their guns covering the final approach to the ridge crest. These were the command bunkers, larger than the others, with thicker walls and deeper positions. Treadwell could see radio antennas, communication wires running between them. Whoever commanded this defense was inside one of those structures, coordinating the remaining guns, calling for reinforcements. He had 1 magazine left, 1 grenade. His body was shutting down, muscles trembling, hands barely able to grip the weapon. He started toward the 5th bunker, moving on instinct, on will, on something beyond physical capability. The machine gun opened up. He felt the rounds pass, felt one tug at his sleeve, another crack past his helmet. He fired back, the Thompson chattering, the last magazine burning down. Empty. He dropped the weapon, pulled the grenade, armed it, and charged. The German gunner did not expect it. No one charged an active machine gun position without cover, without support, without hope. But Treadwell was beyond rational calculation. He reached the bunker, threw the grenade through the slit with the last of his strength, and collapsed against the exterior wall. The blast shook the ground beneath him. Silence. He lay there, gasping, unable to move. The 6th bunker, the final position, fell quiet. No machine gun fire, no movement. Treadwell forced himself to his knees, then to his feet. He stumbled toward the entrance of the 5th bunker, unarmed now, the Thompson lying in the dirt 20 feet back. The steel door opened. A German officer emerged, hands raised, his face pale. Behind him, 3 soldiers, young men with terrified eyes. The officer spoke in accented English. "We surrender, no more, please." Treadwell stared at him, trying to process the words. The officer was perhaps 40, a Hauptmann, a captain, the defensive commander. His uniform was clean, his boots polished. He had been coordinating the defense from safety while his men died. Now he stood with his hands up, offering surrender because the alternative was waiting for another grenade. Treadwell gestured toward the American lines. The officer nodded, turned, and called into the 6th bunker. More Germans emerged, a dozen men, infantry and machine gun crews, all with their hands raised. They walked down the slope in a silent column, leaving their weapons behind, their war finished. Fox Company reached the ridge 10 minutes later. They found Treadwell sitting on the ground near the 5th bunker, his head between his knees, his body shaking with exhaustion. Around him, the 6 pillboxes smoked and burned. German prisoners sat in a group under guard, their faces hollow. The bodies of their comrades lay inside the bunkers, twisted by shrapnel and blast. The ridge was taken. The Siegfried Line was broken. One man had done it. The company commander approached, his face a mixture of awe and disbelief. He started to speak, stopped, tried again. "Sergeant, how did you?" Treadwell looked up at him, his eyes red-rimmed, his face streaked with dirt and powder residue. "Someone had to." That was all he said. Someone had to. As if walking into 6 fortified bunkers alone were simply a matter of necessity, a task that required completion regardless of the cost. The lieutenant nodded slowly, unable to find words adequate to the moment. Word spread quickly. By nightfall, every man in the 45th Infantry Division knew what Jack Treadwell had done. Stories grew in the telling, details added and embellished, but the core remained factual because the evidence was undeniable. 6 bunkers neutralized. A dozen prisoners captured, including the defensive commander. Fox Company had taken the ridge with minimal casualties after Treadwell broke the interlocking fields of fire. The Siegfried Line, the fortress barrier that was supposed to hold the Allies at the German border, had been pierced by a single soldier with a submachine gun and a handful of grenades. The verification process began immediately. The company commander submitted a written report. The battalion commander interviewed witnesses. Fox Company soldiers gave statements, each one describing what they had seen, their voices quiet with something close to reverence. The German prisoners were questioned. The Hauptmann confirmed that Treadwell had assaulted each bunker individually, that his crews had been unable to stop him, that surrender had been the only option once the 5th position fell. The physical evidence was overwhelming. 6 bunkers methodically cleared, the explosive damage consistent with grenades thrown at close range, the interior carnage proof of brutal, efficient violence. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor moved up the chain of command with unusual speed. Generals who had seen thousands of acts of courage recognized this as something different, something that transcended normal definitions of bravery. This was not a soldier reacting to circumstances, not a moment of desperate heroism in the chaos of battle. This was deliberate, sustained, individual combat against fortified positions, executed with a calmness that bordered on the supernatural. In May of 1945, Germany surrendered. The war in Europe ended. Jack Treadwell returned to the United States along with millions of other soldiers, all of them trying to process what they had survived, what they had done, what they had witnessed. He did not speak about the ridge. When asked, he changed the subject. The newspapers wanted interviews. He declined. The army wanted him for war bond tour, public appearances, ceremonies. He refused. He had done his duty. That was enough. On August 19, 1945, President Harry Truman presented Jack Treadwell with the Medal of Honor in a ceremony at the White House. Treadwell stood at attention in his dress uniform, his face expressionless, his eyes focused on some distant point. The citation was read aloud, the words formal and inadequate, describing actions that could not truly be captured in language. Truman placed the medal around Treadwell's neck, shook his hand, and said something that only the two of them heard. Treadwell nodded once. The ceremony ended. He returned to his life. But the army was not finished with him. Men like Treadwell were too valuable to lose, too competent to release into civilian life. He accepted a regular commission, became an officer, spent the next decades training soldiers, leading men, passing on the lessons he had learned at terrible cost. When the Korean War erupted, he was there. When Vietnam came, he went again, older now, a lieutenant colonel commanding a battalion, still leading from the front, still refusing to ask his men to do anything he would not do himself. Vietnam broke many officers. The jungle, the ambushes, the political constraints, the slow realization that this war had no clear endpoint. It destroyed careers and minds and lives. Treadwell survived it, but he came home changed. Not bitter, but quieter, more distant, as if he had spent so much time in war that peace felt alien. He retired in 1972 with a chest full of medals, a silver star from Korea, 2 bronze stars from Vietnam, a Purple Heart for wounds he never discussed. The decorations meant nothing to him. They were metal and ribbon, symbols that other people needed but he did not. He lived quietly in the years that followed, a small house, a routine. He avoided veteran gatherings, Memorial Day speeches, anything that required him to relive the past. The men who had served with him understood. They did not press. When they saw him, they shook his hand, spoke briefly, and moved on. Respect did not require words. Jack Treadwell died on August 9, 1977, of a heart attack. He was 64 years old. The funeral was military, simple and precise. The flag folded with sharp creases, the rifle volley fired with mechanical perfection. Soldiers from 3 wars attended, young men and old, all of them silent, all of them understanding that they were burying something more than a man. They were burying an era, a kind of soldier who did not exist anymore, who perhaps had never truly existed except in moments like that ridge in Germany, when one man decided that the impossible was simply what needed to be done. The Medal of Honor citation hangs in the Pentagon, along with hundreds of others, each one representing an act of extraordinary courage. Treadwell's is distinguished not by flowery language or dramatic phrasing, but by the stark simplicity of what it describes. 6 bunkers, alone, under fire. Success. The military mind appreciates economy of language, and the citation reflects that. But those who read it carefully, who understand infantry combat, who know what it means to cross open ground under machine gun fire, they pause at those words. They read them again. They try to imagine themselves in that moment, and they cannot. The gulf between imagination and reality is too wide. Fox Company veterans, the ones who survived the war, carried the memory of that day for the rest of their lives. In bars and living rooms and hospital beds, they told the story to children and grandchildren, their voices dropping to a whisper when they described the moment Treadwell stood up and started walking toward the ridge. Some embellished the details, adding dialogue and drama. Others stuck to the facts, the bare sequence of events, because the facts were extraordinary enough. All of them agreed on one thing. They had seen something that changed their understanding of what human beings could do when pushed beyond every limit. The ridge near Nether Warsbach is still there, of course. The bunkers remain, crumbling now, overgrown with vegetation, their gun slits dark and empty. Hikers pass them occasionally, wondering what they are, perhaps stopping to take photographs. The ground has healed, grass covering the shell craters, trees growing where there was once only mud and corpses. Nothing marks the spot where Jack Treadwell walked alone into a fortress and broke it with his bare hands and his will. There is no monument, no plaque, no sign explaining that something impossible happened here once. Perhaps that is appropriate. Treadwell did not want recognition. He did not seek glory. He saw a problem, identified a solution, and executed it with the methodical precision of a man who understood that war is not about heroics, but about completing the mission regardless of cost. He did what needed to be done because no one else would, because his company was pinned down, because 8 men had already died trying, because someone had to break the line or more would die in the next attempt. That is the essence of the Medal of Honor. Not bravery in the abstract, not courage as a concept, but the willingness to step forward when stepping forward means almost certain death, to accept that burden not because you want to, but because it is necessary. Most people will never face that choice. Most people will never understand the weight of that decision, the clarity it requires, the absolute absence of hesitation. Jack Treadwell faced it on a cold March morning in Germany, and he did not hesitate. He stood up, checked his weapon, and walked into fire. The men of Fox Company followed him up that ridge because they saw the impossible become real. They watched one man dismantle a fortress defense, and it changed them. Fear did not disappear, exhaustion did not vanish, but they understood that limits were not fixed, that what seemed impossible was simply difficult, that if one man could do that, then they could do their part. They took the ridge. They broke through the Siegfried Line. They pushed into Germany and the war continued, but they carried that moment with them, a memory of pure, undiluted will made manifest. History records the fall of the Siegfried Line as a campaign, a series of battles and advances measured in miles and casualties. But campaigns are built from individual moments, from decisions made by single soldiers in trenches and on ridges, and in the frozen mud of a war that consumed the world. Jack Treadwell's moment lasted perhaps 30 minutes, from the time he left the trench until the German commander surrendered. 30 minutes that broke a defensive line, captured a ridge, and proved that one determined man could change the course of a battle. He never spoke about whether he was afraid. Soldiers who knew him assumed he was, because fear is universal, because only the insane feel nothing when death is immediate and certain. But fear did not stop him. That is the difference between courage and recklessness. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is deciding that something matters more than fear, more than survival, more than the desperate animal urge to run and hide and live. For Treadwell, what mattered was the mission, the men depending on him, the knowledge that if he did not act, the killing would continue and nothing would change. In the decades since that March morning, military historians have analyzed Treadwell's assault, trying to extract lessons, to codify what he did into doctrine and training. They note his use of terrain, his timing of grenade throws, his movement patterns under fire. They create diagrams and tactical breakdowns, reducing 30 minutes of chaos and violence to arrows on a map. But something essential is lost in the analysis. You cannot teach what Treadwell had. You cannot train a man to walk into machine gun fire with nothing but a submachine gun and the certainty that he will prevail. That comes from somewhere deeper, from a place that doctrine cannot reach. The 8 soldiers who died in the initial assault are buried in American cemeteries across Europe, their graves marked with white crosses, their names carved in stone. They were sons and brothers, husbands and fathers, men with futures that ended on a German hillside. Their sacrifice was not wasted. Treadwell's assault succeeded in part because those 8 men had already probed the defenses, had forced the German crews to reveal their positions, had paid in blood for the intelligence that Treadwell used when he moved forward. War is built on such transactions, lives traded for information, for ground, for time. We honor the dead by remembering that their deaths had purpose, that they were not random or meaningless, that they contributed to something larger than themselves. Jack Treadwell understood this. He carried those 8 men with him when he walked up that ridge, not as a burden but as a responsibility. They had tried and failed. He would try and succeed. That was the contract, unspoken but absolute. Infantry combat creates bonds that civilians cannot comprehend, a shared understanding that death is always present, always waiting, and that survival depends on the man beside you being willing to die for you as you are willing to die for him. When that contract is honored, when a soldier steps forward to complete what others could not, it becomes sacred. The war ended. The soldiers came home. The world moved on. But the actions of men like Jack Treadwell remain, preserved in citations and records, in memories and stories, in the quiet knowledge that when the moment came, when everything hung in the balance, some men did not break. They stepped forward. They did the impossible. They became legends not because they sought it, but because they could not do otherwise. If you are watching this, you have just witnessed a story that most people will never hear. Jack Treadwell did not seek fame. He did not want his story told. But his actions deserve to be remembered, not because they were heroic in some abstract sense, but because they represent the absolute pinnacle of human courage and determination. One man alone against 6 fortified bunkers with nothing but a weapon and his will. He prevailed. He survived. He changed history. Please subscribe to this channel if you found this story meaningful. Hit the like button to help others discover it. And in the comments, tell us where you are watching from, your city, state, or country. But more than that, we want to hear your thoughts. What does courage mean to you? Could you have done what Jack Treadwell did? What would you have felt watching him walk up that ridge? Share your reflections below. This story belongs to all of us, a reminder of what human beings can achieve when pushed beyond every limit. Thank you for watching, and thank you for remembering.